Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From the Mount, a podcast from the campus of Mount Perrin Christian School. I'm Steve Kyle, the host of From the Mount. Glad to be with you for another episode. And if you're watching online via YouTube, however you're watching, you know that in the regular co-host seat, normally we have Viola Lucier in the normal co-host seat. If you're watching, you clearly can tell that is not Viola sitting across from me. You might even think, is it a mirror reflection? What's happened? But in the co-host seat, kind of with us today, not his first time on here, but Dr. Matt Kerlin, the head right here at Mount Perrin Christian School. Matt, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
Glad to have you back here for this episode. And if you've read the description about it and you've still chosen to listen to this, because somebody might go, wow, we're talking about board governance or board leadership. I don't know. I hope that this poses to be a much more engaging and interesting than you might have even thought you needed to hear with this episode. And we brought in an expert, Matt, to talk about board governance. He would probably never say that, but we're going to call him an expert. But we have our first time, and I'd like to not think, George, it'll be our only time having you on. We have to come up with some other reason to bring you back on. But we have Mr. George Ethridge with us today. He is currently serves as you are the chairman of the board, right?
Correct.
You serve and have been for how long?
About 14 years as the board chair.
Just 14 years, all my years. But some people are listening, George, if they have graduates from years ago, they know exactly who you are. Anybody who followed volleyball or any of the things in recent years especially. But there's a lot of people who have no idea who you are, George. And so take a couple minutes and introduce yourself to our audience who might be wondering, who is George Ethridge?
Well, thank you, Steve. And I guess first and foremost, appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. So thank you.
Of course.
George Ethridge. I'm married to Alicia for almost 35 years now. We have 4 children, all Mount Perrin Christian School graduates. So our oldest daughter, Elizabeth, graduated in 2011. Our second daughter, Kerlin, graduated in 2016. Our son, Banks, graduated in 2018. And our youngest, Catherine, graduated in 2021. So we've been around Mount Perrin since 2007, so a pretty long time, and have seen some incredible things here and been blessed to be a part of the community here.
Yeah, and you were years at EY.
That's right. So I spent 37 years at Ernst & Young, or EY, and retired in 2022. We have a mandatory retirement age of 60, and so when I hit that, retired, and so it's been great to be in a retired state, and we
is it really?
It really is. I highly recommend it, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're very involved in Johnson's Ferry Baptist Church, obviously involved here, and then obviously, as you guys know, you just have a lot going on all the time. So yeah, it's been great.
You've got various kids in various states of. You've got some already married, some that, you're in the full throes of what it means to be a parent of older kids involved, and they're not all local. Got them around.
That's right. That's correct. So we're very fortunate. Our oldest daughter and her husband live in Charlottesville currently, where she's a CRNA at UVA Hospital. Our second daughter, Kerlin, and her husband are down in Brookhaven. Our son and his brand new wife, as of 2 weeks, they actually home from Italy yesterday from their honeymoon. Anyway, they are in Virginia Highlands, and then our youngest, Catherine, is a senior at UGA. So, and we are expecting our first grandchild in July. So,
Alicia has got to be. This is it. This is. George, this is when you cease to exist. You realize that, right?
Well, I figure that's coming.
That's what I've heard. It's like you almost disappear into oblivion because there's a grandbaby now, but won't be local. So maybe she'll be gone a lot. Maybe that's what we're getting. Well, good. So people have listened, and I've, of course, had the privilege of knowing you all my years here. You've not only served as board chair, but getting to know both Banks and Catherine were the two I got to know. Banks for a year, his senior year, and then, of course, Catherine all the way really through her high school years. And my daughter and your daughter played volleyball together, so we spent some time many a day watching some volleyball and getting to know, and then working alongside your wife for a number of years. What a servant's heart and amazing she has been. So it has been awesome to watch your family, those that I know especially, thrive. But you've served, obviously, it's a big part of this. 14 years is a long time,
Right.
to do anything.
Sure.
But to serve as our board chair, and let me just say the reason this conversation, Matt, I think you're one of when this conversation even come up, Matt, I think you were the one who brought it to me, correct?
Correct.
I think that was your idea, based on, and I think I'll even let you say where, because this is an important, something we do regularly at Mount Perrin that kind of maybe led to the discussion of why this podcast might be a really important one.
Each spring, we send out a parent survey and get feedback from our families about ways we can best serve our families. And we read all those comments, we take them seriously. And one of the things I noticed on this most recent survey was several comments related to parents who wanted to know more about our board and how our board functions. So I recommended we have a podcast episode on this. We'll probably also do a blog post and some other things, but I thought this was a great place to start.
Yeah, I agreed. And I thought, not only that, I think there's one of the things I was, and I won't say this, George, because you're sitting here as the chairman of the board. One of the things I was most impressed with when I first came here, of course, I've been a part of other board run, but I think most of our listeners are familiar with what it means to know what essentially I've heard of a board. Sure. I know many of our listeners are probably sit on some kind of board, but not every board operates the same. Not every board has the same kind of focal point. And so when Matt brought this, it was interesting because I thought, wow, I bet there's not only a lot of people who don't know much about, but really the significant role of board governance in an institution like ours as a covenantal Christian school. What extremely important role do they kind of serve? So, I think a great question to start is, why would an independent Christian school, and I'm going to pose this to both of you because I'm really just kind of facilitating this discussion. Why do we use kind of this board model as it's there are lots of, you've seen church schools, you've seen no boards. It's just why is the model we choose as a independent Christian school? Why is it a board? And that's for either one of you guys to answer.
Okay, I'll start, and then Matt can correct me. I forget. But, I think with respect to a board at a Christian school, obviously there are different ways. With a church, for instance, they're often a ministry, and they're sort of governed by whether it's an elder board or the senior pastor or something like that. An independent Christian school, what the board predominantly does is it allows for really two or three things. Number one, the board is really responsible for the mission of the school and upholding the mission of the school and not allowing the school to drift off of the mission. If you think of really most of the elite Ivy League universities in the United States, they started as Christian schools. If you think of many of the elite schools throughout the country in the K through 12, they started as Christian schools, but what? Most of them did that because their board did not adhere to the mission that was originally set out. So I would say the number one thing is, the board is there to make sure that we stay aligned on the mission. Number two, I would say that the board has a responsibility in order to uphold that mission is the sort of hiring of, evaluating of, supervising of, and if necessary, changing out the head of school with the goal and aspiration that person will do a great job in the operations of the school while also upholding and building a culture around that mission.
Sure.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
And then the third thing that we certainly are responsible for is just with respect to the financial side of the school, just making sure that we are being fiscally responsible, that we're having good stewardship, that we're sort of using that missional plumb line for any decisions we make, especially ones related to financial things that could get you in trouble. And the reason I'll point that out is simply that schools that struggle with mission, their biggest issue is they get into financial trouble. And then all of a sudden they start having to compromise in order to meet their dollars and cents. So anyway, I can't tell you I was responsible in any way for the setting up of the board. That happened with Mount Perrin School years and decades before I showed up. But I do believe that people like Ron Mulkey, who for me as the board chair, and others did a wonderful job of setting up the governance and sort of tracking into those primary three things that I just.
Yeah. Anything, Matt, you want to?
I think that's well said. I think I would just add to that the board provides crucial accountability and support for the people who are leading the school. I think those who are leading are not in the best position to govern. And I think those who are governing are not in the best position to lead. I think having those two operations separated from one another helps everybody kind of stay in their lane and focus on what they're best at. I think obviously in places where you may have a single leader for a school, like a senior pastor, as you mentioned, George, you've got a limited perspective and you've got less accountability. You have less talent being brought to bear in the governance of the school. You have fewer areas of specialty that are available at the disposal of school leaders to call upon for advice and support. So I do think the reason a board governance model is so commonplace is because over years and years of trial and error, people have discovered that nonprofits work best with that model of governance. I mean, obviously, I can tell you from personal experience that when you have a mature, stable, healthy board, the trickle-down effect is phenomenal. It has a direct impact on the school leaders and on the employees and on the families and on the students. I mean, there's simply no substitute for strong, stable, mature governance like what we have at Mount Perrin.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's one of the things. I've been doing this 30 years, and I've only done 9 of them here at Mount Perrin. And so it's really interesting, when I first, and I currently just sit as an observational member of the board. I attend the board meetings. I speak into and relate to things specific primarily to Christian life. But it's been really fascinating from the very beginning because you started number one by saying we got to focus on the mission. And there's not a board meeting that the very first thing outside of prayer, we have a devotion, time of prayer. It is the mission. You say the mission. You repeat the entire mission. I think the mission is on the board while you say it. It's almost as this, hey, listen, everybody, this is what we're still about. I mean, it's imperative. And there have been even times in my years where I think you've even redirected it back to the mission. Hey, wait a minute. Let's focus on and to me, that's crucial because when you get to, you had mentioned schools who have begun to mission drift. You have other private Christian schools that the larger you grow in numbers, one of the first things to do is this mission drift begins to happen because we're thinking of dollars in enrollment than we are why we're actually here to do that. And what I think makes Mount Perrin unique, the fact that we're still pretty large considering other private Christian schools, and the fact that we're still remarkably on mission. Now, we're not perfect, and no school is. But it shows it's possible. And I think the difference is a board who focuses on that and then make sure when you look at the primary functions of the board, which I think you've kind of talked about, the hiring primarily of the head of school, making sure they understand and they're going to be mission focused. That's paramount in all of that. And I can say to our board, we have a fantastic group of men and women. So kudos to them for at least our perspective on doing just that. So any other things for either one of you when you think of the roles? Because you kind of mentioned the 3 points. Would you look at that as the primary function of the board at Mount Perrin or board would be the few things you mentioned, hiring of the head, overseeing the budget? I mean, to make sure the financial assets, maybe that's I think the operational budget is not something that I think there's approval on, but I don't know. Anything else?
I would say that's all. Those are the 3 primary things. I would also say that what the board brings, hopefully, is a level of just a professional expertise. Board, we have people with a background in Christian education. We have attorneys. We have people in risk management. So we have people that have professional expertise. Because we want to not only be, yes, we're focused on the mission, yes, we're focused on, our one employee, which is the head of school and in the financial stewardship of the assets, but we also want to be a resource to the head of school when they need advice or counsel, things where they're looking for a little bit of advice. hopefully there's some professional expertise that's there as well.
Yeah. And then I think strategy, I think, was one of the notes, focusing on the long term, what is the best direction? Are we going to this board? I'm not saying those aren't decisions we're currently making, but they're ones boards make.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to be making a major investment in property, or we're going to be, looking at the purchase of a new building or combining with I would assume that would be the same for Mount Perrin. That wouldn't be like a Matt coming in going, guess what I just did? I bought a whole bunch of land and we're now part of another school. That's a board part of, correct?
Absolutely. And I, to some extent, one of the things we always talk about is whether you're in a school or a church, whatever, you always need to be looking 5-10 years out. Like, where are we headed? Where do we believe God is leading us to go? What opportunities are, and we don't want those to be surprises. We want to be prayerful about them way in advance. And then number two, just have open hands to what God may be leading us to do.
Yeah.
And so I think from a strategy perspective, the board is always trying to look ahead and say, where are the issues that we're facing? What's happening with respect to students, or what are we seeing? What are trends with respect to students and learning? And are we preparing for that? And a perfect example of that, years ago was just technology. Like, hey, are we keeping up with technology? Where do we need to go with that? And as you guys know, you sort of went one direction, and then all of a sudden people said, hey, we need to, start to get, out of the schools and things of that nature. So it's just been an interesting dynamic where you're thinking about those things from a strategy perspective, but being willing to continue to learn and grow and do the right thing.
Yeah. Let me ask this question of both of you that ties into that, because I don't really have it in the notes here, but I'm just curious, when we talk about the primary functions, give me an example, either one of you, of and where you see this, because you've served on other boards and maybe currently still serve on other boards, where you see boards overstepping. And again, I'm not even referencing ours. I'm just saying, generally speaking, we're a board. You're like, hey, listen, maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're on a board going, yikes. Wow, that in an environment like ours, is there an example where a board is now getting into, they need to be careful for proper board? I'm just curious. It's not even on my notes. I'm just curious. You both can give me one for that matter.
Sure.
I'll give you a couple, and then I'm sure George has some too. But I always think it's dangerous as a board member if you come into your board service with an agenda, a soapbox that you want to stand on, a drum you want to beat, something that's heavy on your mind or heart that you want to use your board participation to sort of advocate for. I think that's a dangerous place to be. I also think that if you are serving on a board and you are a parent of a student at that school, it's always challenging for you to step outside your role as a parent and think not what is best for my child, but what is best for the school as a whole. And I think if you can avoid those two potential pitfalls, I think you're well on your way to being a great board member. George may have some as well.
Yeah, I would just add a couple things. Number one, to Matt's point, use this phrase with him before, back in the day, if you remember the Sherlock Holmes example, he had a hat that had the bills on it.
Yeah.
Each direction. And it used to be when I would go meet with Dr. Tilley back in the day, I would say, hey, I'm here with either my board hat on, I'm flipping it around saying, hey, I'm here as a parent, not as a board member. I'm here as a parent because I want to talk to you about something relative to one of my children.
Yeah.
And I think that ability to distinguish those two is critical, because you never want your board role to be doing something that's really just advocating for things your family or child.
Yeah. It's going to work. Got it.
Number two is, I think, probably the biggest issue you have to avoid as a board is getting involved in operational issues. There are day-to-day decisions that are made here. There are a million decisions made every day here. And the reality, if not strategic in nature, long-term effect of the school, it's not really the board's role. The board has hired one employee, the head of school, who is responsible for setting in place with his executive council, how to run the school on a day-to-day basis with respect to operational decisions. And the board needs to stay above those. And so that is probably the biggest area where a board has to be super careful, where they start to dip into day-to-day operations. Not the board's role at all.
Yeah. That's important. And maybe you're listening and you're going, wow, I sit on a board and I think we're doing that. Well, I mean, you've heard it. Yeah, you're not supposed to be doing that. So, and I will say about half, I don't know what the number is now, of our current board members who have kids that are a part of, which is, by the way, essential. I mean, anybody who thinks, hey, can you really? Yeah, the answer is not only can you, you need to have that. I mean, that's really important that you have board members that have children, or in your case, had 4 children, a part of our school. And I think that's important and recognize that. So for people who might not know specifics about our board, how many board members do we currently have that sit on our board?
We currently have 11.
11. Okay.
11 members.
Out of a total possibility of what are we allowed to have?
We can have as many as 17, which would include some, if you were going to add some former former chairs of the board. Generally, we're going to be 11 to 15 in general.
And that's a good operating number. I mean, from a standpoint of board, too big becomes problematic. One, if it's anything like any meeting I've been a part of, it could take way longer to hear everybody's perspective. Is that, 11, if I'm listening, do I listen to that and go, that's it? That sounds like a great number, and why? Is that a...
Yeah, I would say that probably depends. Matt may have different experiences. Like you described, I've been on some things where we had way too many board members, and therefore it's very, very hard to align. I feel like one of the best things that I've seen experienced from Ron Mulkey's chairmanship, and then since I've been on the board, we've just had a great alignment back to the board. And I think part of that comes from the fact that we just have a manageable number. Do I think that 13 would be too many? No. Do I think 25 would be too many? Absolutely. So I think that Mount Perrin is a relatively sweet spot number.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think it's pretty important for a head of school to have a close relationship with each board member. That becomes increasingly difficult once you get beyond about 11 or 12 members. I do think 11 to 13, 14 is probably a sweet spot. And I think you need enough members to form out a committee structure so that you can have some specificity in your work. But beyond that, I think increasing the number of board members makes relationships exponentially more complicated.
Yeah. And it's and again, having been to our board meetings, I'm just going to speak from experience, and I'm a non-voting member, so I play no part in any kind of. It feels like a great number when you're in the meetings, getting and then we're often without a member or two due to professional responsibilities and requirements. So it never feels like, wow, this is So I was just curious where that sits, not having been there. And then this is a question. The next question I'll pose, and I genuinely don't know the answer to. I shouldn't say that. I was a part of since I've been here, we've had board members step off and we've had new board members added. But I've never, because can't be on the board, can't sit on the board. How are board members selected? And then are there term limits? Do they get voted? They have to be voted off. Is it a lifetime term? Once you're on, you're good until, is there a forced retirement age of 65 where you can't be?
There you go.
And again, that's for either one of you, because I genuinely don't know.
Why don't I start, and then Matt can add in some color commentary. With respect to our board, the way we go about selecting board members historically has been that the head of school and the executive council are obviously interacting with parents. They're interacting with the school, and so they come with recommendations to potential board members. Same with our board members, our current board members may come and say, hey, this is a person who has the best interest of school in mind, and I would like you to consider them. So that's sort of the process of how we begin the process. And then we just go through a vetting process, much of which is not surprising given that the mission of the school is, number one, is really around just making sure that that person is aligned in terms of their beliefs, their belief system. We, as you know, we have a statement of faith and we have a statement of life and conduct, and they need to be in full agreement with that. Not like, hey, casual agreement. We need them in full agreement with that, and that they hopefully are followers of Jesus in respect to that.
Yeah.
So we start down that path, just getting to know them, and then obviously we do look for certain levels of professional expertise. With respect to term limits, we historically have always had sort of a 5-year term that can be renewed for 5. During COVID and during our head of school change, we suspended those briefly. We're about to bring back term limits similar to that here in the next probably months. But the goal there is really just to always have kind of a refreshing board. So that's the goal of the term limits, so that we don't grow stale. We don't get sort of it's not a life sentence, where you
for anybody.
Exactly, for anybody. And so that's part of it. And then from there, our goal is always for people to, they feel for any reason that they need to step off or whatever, that's always available to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that so far our board has been very, very good at being self-sustaining. It really involves the executive council, the head of school, involves the board members themselves. So it's been very positive. But, Matt, you jump in there as well. You have certainly not only experience here, but other places as well.
Yeah, I think a key point to make is that boards are self-sustaining. They vet the board members who will replace outgoing board members. And I think that having some term limits is important so that you get that fresh perspective. You also want a rotation so that you don't have too many board members leaving at the same time or too many board members joining at the same time. So boards are really trying to kind of thread the needle by being stable and providing strong continuity for school leadership on the one hand, but also providing fresh perspectives on the other. And I think our board is doing a good job of seeking that good balance. It makes perfect sense. Most school bylaws have some provision that allows the school to suspend term limits or to keep board members on for longer than their term under circumstances of strategic importance or crisis like a global pandemic or head of school transitions, those kinds of things. And I think we've got a good balance of having fresh perspective on the one hand and stability on the other.
Yeah, and I think that, anybody who stops and thinks about that thinks, do we want to be going through the middle of board transition while we're in the middle of a global pandemic or the search for a new head? And the answer obviously is no. You want rock solid consistency through those times, and that's really important. And so I think you've kind of addressed again, because sometimes, and I sadly I didn't know. I've been through the selection process, how that's done. I've even submitted names 3-4 years ago and have been here for the addition of a couple of our board members, excellent additions to a couple of our board members here. And so that is a process that is happening in there, and how that happens and why it happens. And I think it's important to note. And maybe, again, if you're listening and wondering, it's typically not don't email us saying, hey, I heard the board thing and I'm interested in putting my name in the pot. I don't think it exactly works that way. So if you are listening, we're not looking for emails or volunteers at this point. If you're board material, Matt, right, we'll reach out to you. Don't call us. We'll call. No,
I wouldn't say that I would outright reject that conversation. A lot of times the best board members with the highest potential are people who have served in a similar capacity elsewhere. They understand how board governance works.
Sure.
I've had people reach out to me from time to time in past leadership positions. They've been involved in board service and volunteered to say, hey, look, I'm not looking for more, uses of my time, but if the opportunity could arise and I could be of help, just let me know. I think I'm never going to be averse to that kind of conversation. Yeah. But by the same token, I'm always a little bit leery of people who are gung-ho to serve on the board. I wonder,
do you know what it's like?
Yeah. This is a lot of time and a lot of, detailed work. And I'm just kind of curious about motivation sometimes.
Yeah, that's all I was really. Obviously, we're not going to openly reject.
One more quick thing on
please.
that is just simply that things that I believe has this Mount Perrin Christian School is that it does have sort of a long tenured board. And I mean that throughout all of Ron Mulkey's tenure, all of the time I've been on the board. And that is that we always had sort of a 5+5. And that doesn't mean that everybody served 10 years, nor should everybody serve a full 10. But what tends to happen in schools is if you have this sort of 3-year rotation, about the time somebody understands their role, understands what's going on at the school, they're rotating off. And so I think the fact that we have a little bit longer and a little more stable type approach is something that several board chairs have called me about over the years to say, hey, how are y'all doing that? Like, what are y'all doing to allow for more stability than what they may be experiencing at their school?
Yeah, I'd add to that. If you are in a place where you have a deep talent pool, prospective board members, I think it makes sense to have longer serving board members. If you're in a place where talented board members are really difficult to come by and you're looking for warm bodies, having more regular turnover probably gives you an off-ramp for some people who maybe their board service hasn't been optimal either for them or for the school. So I think that Mount Perrin's structure is highly appropriate for our context.
Yeah, certainly when you look at the level of parents and constituents we have as part of that, focused on our mission, Christ-centered, qualified when it comes to the expertise they bring to the table. I mean, I look around the room of the people that are in that room for a normal board meeting, and there is, some of the best of the best in what they do is around that table, and they're giving of their time to serve here. And when you look at that, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's a great thing. So, and then we'll be kind of landing this board discussion. How do you guys work on, whether it is staying sharp as a board in our own leadership development and accountability and board evaluation, what parts of that come into play for our board on, hey, just being reminded why we're here, what we're doing. Hey, let's make sure that's necessary anywhere with anybody. What are some of the things in place over the years, either past, current, or future, that we participate in?
So I'll start, and then Matt, you can add too. First and foremost, we do a self-evaluation because we want our board to evaluate and, give some recommendations back on things that feel like we either do well or need to do a little better. So that is always helpful annually to get that. For two, we try to have some level of sort of board orientation and board education. So as things change in the educational realm, we need our board to stay up to speed on that. So sometimes, as you've seen, Steve, sometimes that comes through the board meeting itself. As part of it, we may do that. And then, like, we plan to have a board training this summer for our board members. Even though they've been there a while, there's always room for continued education, continuous learning. And so we try that. And then this is a little bit separate from that, but one of the other things that we as a board do is we also get sort of the full debrief of both a faculty and staff survey that Matt does and the parent survey that is done, so that we get a sense of both culture internally and culture externally of the school, so that we can get a sense of how we're faring as a school that helps us to do our evaluation of Matt as we go down each year as part of that process.
Yeah, that's great. Matt, anything to add?
I think that's perfect.
Yeah, I didn't know if you had, because obviously, and for those that are listening that aren't aware that this Matt's in his first year here as head of school, those are one of those, but I have visions for, or one day, or maybe this isn't the time to tell the board chair what you have visions for. I don't know.
Well, I'll just say my vision is to have a strong relationship with our board and with our board chair. I think outside of my relationship with Christ and my wife, the two most important relationships I probably have here at Mount Perrin are my relationship with the board chair and my relationship with our CFO or associate head of school. And I think it's incumbent upon me to make sure those relationships are strong. And, I think the board, it gets a lot of sources of information from a lot of different people, and good boards listen. I think our board does a great job of listening, and they are always looking for ways to be better. So I appreciate that about them.
Agree completely. So as we wrap up, I'm listening. I'm driving right now. I listen to the board podcast. Whether I'm a Mount Perrin family member or not, potential Mount Perrin family, I just interested in board governance. What one or two things might you encourage to whether some kind of listener, like, hey, just as you reflect on things. Now, obviously there's some specific ones you might speak directly to Mount Perrin families about, but just in general, when you talk about from a position of leadership, currently serving as a board chair, and this question again is for both of you, what one or two things might you say, hey, that's what I want you to take away?
Well, I would say One of the things, and we asked this of our board members as well, if I was going to ask one thing from the Mount Parent community relative to the board, it would be to pray for our leaders, and that is pray for our head of school, pray for our executive council, pray for their teachers and their coaches, for our board. In other words, we all take our leadership roles very, very seriously, and we really want to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit in anything and everything that we do. So we would love to have your prayers as we move forward. That's always a great thing. The second thing is just to recognize that, once again, back to an earlier comment, that with respect to our community, the board is there for the items I mentioned earlier. We're here for the mission. We're here, stewardship. We're here to, hold the head of school accountable and to hopefully be a good guide for him. But the operational matters, those all go to the head of school or to the principal or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that would be sort of what I would say to them. For the broader community, I would just say, for those that are just interested in governance in general, I think you just really need to recognize the difference of what a board does, which we talked about earlier, versus what your actual leadership and management of the school does on a day-to-day basis. And those are quite different, and they both are very important, and we are kind of holding each other accountable, but just recognize those differences.
Yeah. Anything? You covered it.
Sure. I think if you're, out there in the world and you're listening to this and you're thinking about a place where you might invest some of your time or your volunteer hours or maybe even some of your financial support, one of the questions I think people ask less often than they should is, what kind of governance does that organization have? An organization can have a good reputation externally, but if the governance is weak or floundering or failing to do its job in some way, I think you're going to eventually see problems surface, reputational problems or mission drift from that organization. So, if you're thinking about investing yourself in an organization, I think it's smart to ask questions about governance and to understand better how that governance works. When I'm interacting with parents, especially parents who are considering making financial contributions to the school, a lot of times they will ask me, tell me how your board works, because they're thinking long-term, they're thinking strategically, and they're thinking about investing where they're going to get a strong return on that investment and know it's going to be used for the purposes for which they give it.
Right. And board matters.
Yeah. And one thing to that point, just to add on, as a man about to get to be a grandfather, that one of the things that I think speaks most highly to our school is the fact that I'm now at the stage where I'm seeing some of my children's friends that have been married, that now have children, and their children, the Mount Parent. And if we were not still missionally aligned, if we were not still forward in the way that they experienced here themselves, they would not be reinvesting here with their own children. And I think that is similar to what you're describing, because before you start to invest dollars, you start to invest the lives of your children or grandchildren. You're always looking to say, are they on with respect to their mission? Yeah. And so just very exciting to see that as we go on 50 years here at the school.
It is 50 years. So that was actually really interesting, and I think no doubt for anybody who listened and thought anything about board or board governance, but certainly how it relates to us. I don't know if there's a question that did not get answered that you wouldn't go, I got it. That makes sense. And not only that, I hope you walk away and go, not only do I got it, I feel great. Like I feel good about where Mount Parent is, but why this kind of thing matters. And I think the info, the nuggets are helpful in every situation. So enjoyed the conversation. George, great to have you on.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll bring you back on for something other than board talk. Something, because I know you're into lots of things. You've been lots of places. You've led Bible study. You've been a lot of stuff. So maybe we'll bring you on one of those episodes. And Matt, great in the co-host seat. I won't tell Viola that, we might make this, we might call it something to do, the bald and the beautiful. I don't know what we'll call it, but thank you guys both for being on here, and thank you for listening to another episode of From the Mount.